Hi, my friend. In this video, we're going to be making UKG bass inspired by Sammy Virgi's track, If You Need It. And we're going to find out if we can do it in under 10 minutes using a sub bass as well as a couple of mid bass layers to get the texture and character of the sound. So right here, we are looking at the Ableton project file that we'll be working on. And this did take me about 10, maybe 15 minutes to recreate. We're going to be going over the MIDI for it, as well as some of the sound design, but really not focusing on too much synthesis or anything like that, or music theory. I'm much more of a sample-based creator, and if you are too, then you'll find this particularly useful. I'm going to quickly solo out the bass so you get an idea of what we'll be creating here. Mostly a sub bass and as well as a mid bass layer to add the texture and the character. And all in all, this whole project, if we look at it, it's fully arranged, mixed, mastered, and ready to go. And that took me about 6 hours to complete. So if finishing songs faster is something that you'd like help with, I've made you a completely free bundle of templates, samples, and some special bonuses that I use every single day to complete one new song fully ready to go every single week. So visit the link in the description to grab the ultimate song finishing toolkit for free. And with that said, let's get into this. All right. So what I've done is I've soloed out the drums and the bass so that we can focus on the bass while listening to it in context with the rest of the drums. I think it's always important when you're building your tracks to be listening to it, not in isolation. You want to make sure that things are working together to create the finished track in totality, as opposed to just making a bass sound good by itself. You want to make sure everything's working together. You're finishing songs, not just creating a bass line. In addition to that, I do also want to point out that right here, you can see that we have Sammy Virgi's track, If You Need It, actually in the project file as well. And this is super important because what you can then do is map the solo key to, say, the S key on your keyboard, so you can flick between the reference track back and forth so that you can do a couple things. One is you want to be selecting the right notes while following the reference track. So flicking back and forth, you can make sure that you're setting the right notes. Second is that you can choose the right sound so that it's sounding as similar as possible by flicking back and forth. You can make sure that it's sounding similar to the reference. And then third, a really big mixing tip here is you want to set the volumes to that reference track as closely as possible, because setting volumes and selecting the right sound is really that kind of 80%. It's like the 80-20 rule. So 20%, it's nothing too crazy. You're not doing any crazy sound design stuff, volume and sound selection, but it's going to get you 80% there. And it's going to be the fastest way to really get a professional and awesome sounding sound, as opposed to just winging it and hoping that you're just going to get things right. So with that said, let's take a look at the bass. This bass track has two layers. There's a sub layer and a mid bass layer for the character. In terms of the MIDI, before we get into the sound design a little bit more closely, let me just give you a quick look at what it looks like. So what it kind of is like that offbeat polyrhythmic kind of sound that resets after every 2 bars. I'll just kind of show you the MIDI so that you can kind of copy it. I can't fully explain what's going on. I'm not a music theory kind of producer. I'm a lot more sample based and vibe based. So if that works with you, then we're on the same boat here. But this is a look at the MIDI. It's kind of changing the note a little bit. So there's a little bit of a chord progression, kind of vibing things out a little bit here. In terms of the sound design, like I mentioned, there are 2 layers. So first off is the sub. So yeah, let me just mute the bass guitar layer. So this is what the sub sounds like on its own. And the reason I usually like to do this in 2 different tracks like this is 2 reasons. One, I find that starting things off with a sub bass sound, like basically just a sine wave, it's a super awesome way to, very similar as if you were using like a traditional piano or a guitar to start off with chord progression and melody. Since it's almost the most like natural tone, there's not a lot of crazy sound design, you can really focus on getting the right notes down correctly first, and then playing with sound design and getting like the texture right by adding in the mid bass layer later. In addition to that, I also find it's a nice way to control the mix, because you can have the sub that's really focusing on the low end completely, and then when you add in the mid layer, that's where you're adding in the character. So one is really just focusing on the low end and the fullness, and the other one is adding in that character. So I'm going to add that back in. And taking a look at the sound design here. So for the subs, what I have is this little V sub kind of preset that I made. It might be included in that little freebie that I mentioned at the beginning of the video. Basically, it's more or less just a sine wave with some options to add in a little bit of drive. And the main reason for adding in some of the drive here is to help it cut through the mix a little bit more and add a bit more character. Nothing too crazy going on there. It's mostly just a simple sine wave. So if I open it up, it's just using operator, and it's more or less just a simple sine wave with a little bit of some sauce going on there. Nothing crazy. What's more interesting, I think, is this setup with the dual tracks. So you might notice here that the MIDI is playing on the sub track, but the MIDI is not playing on the mid bass track. And how I've set that up is that instead of dropping the MIDI on this track, what you can do is, if instead of all ins, as you can see here on the sub track, when you click that, you can select the sub track that you have, and this one is called subs. And then if you flick it, instead of off or auto, if you set it to in, it will then play the MIDI for you in your output. So what's happening here is, instead of it playing the MIDI on the track, it's actually then grabbing the MIDI from whatever you've selected. So this way you don't have to be duplicating over the MIDI tracks. If you make a change to the MIDI here, it'll automatically change it on the mid bass here. So it's just a lot more efficient and a lot less room for errors. It's super fast. It's a faster way to work, and I think it's a little bit more clever. And that's what I usually do, and I'd recommend as well. So with that said, then you don't have to worry about the notes. You can just worry about the sound design, since the MIDI is automatically coming in. In terms of the sound design, what I chose is a bass guitar sample. In my music, that's kind of a bit more my signature sound, using bass guitar. It's what I prefer. I like the sound of it. You can use anything you like in your mid bass. You can change it from song to song, or you can try to find something similar where maybe it's a synth that you like the mid bass character of it, and that's your kind of signature sound, your go-to. In terms of what I've done here is, usually what I'd recommend doing with this method is adding in the MIDI pitch device. So in case the MIDI is sounding like perfect for the sub, but when it's routing into your mid bass, it's sounding too low or too high, you can easily move it up 12 semitones or down 12 semitones if you need to. Then right here, it's going into my sound of choice. It's actually a sample from the Omnisphere Trillion that I really like. What I did was sampled it out and dropped it into an Ableton sampler. This way it's going to have less of a CPU load, and it has some of the fun Ableton stuff you can have in here. So I do have the drive, the SMP circuit. I like bringing that up a little bit for that kind of distorted bass guitar character. When working with a sub and mid bass separate tracks, what you'll want to do is, on the mid bass track, is remove a bunch of the lows. So we have an EQ8 here at the 200 hertz mark, dropping out a bunch of the lows, so that way it's not overlapping and getting all muddy and crappy sounding. This way the subs is carrying all the weight and really taking care of the low end in a pure sine wave, beautiful way. And then you make room on the mid bass, so it's just adding in the character on the upper area there. Then what we have next is, I have this one knob width plugin, just kind of taking it away from the middle and pushing that mid bass to the sides a bit. So it's making everything sound a bit fuller, and it's also making room in the middle for that sub to shine through. We have a bit of one knob side chain going on here, just going against the kick drum. So that way it is bouncing away, it's ducking away from the kick drum, so the kick comes through. And it does add a little bit of that bounce as well. Then we do have some one knob side chain, adding in a bit of fullness to the sound. And then I also have this transient designer, just getting rid of some of the sustain so it tightens it up a little bit. If you would like, let me know in the comments below if you want me to explain this whole kind of custom channel strip, how I built it, and kind of the decision making that goes into each thing here, a little bit more detail. I can make a custom video for it, but it's a pretty interesting way to have this load up on every single track, so you can make the very simple mix as you go decisions as you're going along with some simple one knobs, so you're also using your ears more than the visuals. But with that said, that is a look at this track. There's nothing else to really mention in terms of the arrangement. We'll go over that in a future video. But more or less, the bass is playing what it's playing here throughout the whole thing. So yeah, there we go. Hi, my friend. Matt from Best Friends Club here. And if you've been paying attention, then you probably have already figured out what the 80-20 rule is when it comes to building out your basses. So the goal here is to get 80% of the result with only 20% of the time, energy, or effort. And because the first key to the 80-20 rule of bass is to use a reference track, we're making sure that we're very easily hitting 80% of a very professional sounding track. In particular, we focus on nailing the notes that our bass is playing, the sound design of our bass, as well as the volume of our bass track compared to that reference track. This just keeps things fast and super focused. The second key of the 80-20 rule here is to layer your basses so that you have the maximum amount of control over your bass's melody, low end, and the character or vibe. The third and final key is to repurpose your old projects by adding old project files, racks, and entire groups to your Ableton collection folder. By creating a suite of powerful templates, Ableton racks, and one-knob effects that you've personalized and curated over time, it's going to make sure that you get a higher quality result faster. If you'd like to get a head start by downloading all the racks, templates, and all the files that you've seen me use in the Ableton project file for this video, or if you'd just like to take a closer look at any of the techniques or tracks you saw me work on in this video at your own pace, you can find a link to this video's project files on screen now and at the second link that's in the YouTube description. I'm recreating a different song from the Beatport top charts every single week and making the project files available to anyone who wants them. You'll also get access to a private Discord where you can ask me and the community questions, as well as share tracks for feedback. If you or your music are not quite ready for a shot in the arm like that, I've also made you a completely free bundle of templates, samples, and special bonuses that have helped me figure out how to completely finish one new song each and every single week. And you can grab that free Ultimate Song Finishing Toolkit by visiting the first link that's in the YouTube description here. However, if you just feel like staying on YouTube for now, that's totally fine. Save that link for later and check out this playlist of videos where I remake basses from other songs from the Beatport top charts. Or if you want to take what you learned in this video to the next level, definitely check out this video right here.